On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, beginning one of the most significant military conflicts in Europe since World War II. What began as a geographical and humanitarian crisis quickly evolved into a global economic shock. The effects of this war have reached far beyond the borders of Ukraine, touching supply chains, energy markets, and financial systems around the world. I'm Katya Persunko, and in this presentation I will explore the wide-ranging economic disruptions caused by the war, focusing on how it's impacted Ukraine directly, shaking global markets, and forced countries to rethink their economic strategies. The war in Ukraine has caused major economic disruptions from rising commodity prices to financial instability, negatively affecting both Ukraine and the global economy. There are three main concepts I would like to explore in this presentation. First is the economic and humanitarian crisis inside Ukraine. Second is the global financial and market impact. And the last one is policy shifts and structural changes triggered by the conflict. Let's begin. Beginning with the humanitarian side of the conflict, over 12 million people have been forced to move away, escaping violence and uncertainty. Many left behind not just their homes and possessions, but also their livelihoods, communities, and even family members. For millions, the war fractured their sense of security, identity, leaving emotional wounds that will take generations to heal. This mass displacement has not only strained neighboring countries, but also has deepened the humanitarian crisis within Ukraine itself. Even after fighting ends, the challenges of resettlement, psychological recovery, and national rebuilding will be massive, making the road to recover painfully long and complex. Ukraine's economy has been devastated. In the first year of the war, its GDP declined by up to 35%, according to Kilfoyle. Poverty levels skyrocketed, and about a third of households now face food insecurity. Much of the country's infrastructure, like roads, bridges, energy grids, have been severely damaged, making daily life and commerce extremely difficult. The United Nations emphasizes that massive reconstruction efforts will be necessary with long-term investments in health, education, and housing. The war's economic impact did not stop at Ukraine's borders. It quickly rippled across the globe. Commodity prices, especially for energy, food, and metals, surged to levels not seen in decades. Global supply chains, already fragile after the COVID-19 pandemic, came under even greater strain. The war deepened existing bottlenecks, creating shortages, delivery delays, and further instability in markets that were just beginning to recover. Inflation surged around the world, but it was low-income countries that were hit the hardest. Still struggling with the effects of the pandemic, many of these nations saw food and fuel prices rise beyond what their population could afford. Poverty rates deepened across the developing world as basic necessities became out of reach for millions. According to Zelda in 2023, supply disruptions triggered by the war are expected to hang long-lasting effects, complicating recovery efforts for years to come. The war also sent shockwaves through global financial markets. Stocks became increasingly unstable, with the Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions experiencing some of the most severe disruptions. In response to rising inflation, central banks around the world aggressively raised interest rates, hoping to stabilize economies. However, the long-term impacts of these measures, especially on growth, debt, and inequality, remain highly uncertain. Now, let's take a look at the other party of this conflict, Russia, and how the war impacted its economy. A major part of the global response were sanctions that were originally designed to cripple Russia's economy. To some extent, they succeeded. Russia's GDP growth slowed significantly and public resources were stretched thin, especially with the massive increases in military spending. Yet, despite this pressure, Russia showed unexpected resilience, largely through strengthened trade relationships with non-Western countries. Additionally, Russia's enormous natural resources, including food and energy, allowed it to maintain a level of self-sufficiency that helped cushion the blow of international sanctions. Its sheer geographical size and access to key commodities made it harder to fully isolate the country economically. Now let's talk about policy shifts and economic realignment. On a broader scale, the war is reshaping how countries think about globalization and economic security. Some countries are currently reassessing their trade dependencies, particularly with Russia and China, to limit the support and help for those nations. Energy security has become an urgent priority, sometimes even at the expense of long-term green energy goals. Meanwhile, military budgets are rising across Europe and beyond, often deriving resources away from social programs and other public investments. The global economy is entering a new era of caution, competition, and recalibration. To sum up the information covered in this video, the war in Ukraine has had devastating consequences not only for Ukrainians but for the global economy at large. From widespread inflation to reconfigured supply chains, the impacts have already triggered major long-term changes. And the full scope of these transformations is only beginning to emerge. We're living through an economic shift that may reshape global markets for years, if not decades to come. The true economic cost of the war in Ukraine is still unfolding and may not be fully understood for many years. What's already clear, however, is that the world must adapt to a new economic reality shaped by instability, realignment, and resilience. So I'll leave you with this question. What role should the global community play in preventing future conflicts from causing such widespread disruption to lives and economies? And are we prepared to face the economic consequences of a more divided world? Thank you for watching. Have a great day.